Stepping up to the plate next is Mitch Resnick. I heard, as we were discussing before, that Mitch Resnick doesn't like to take credit for hardly anything he does. He's one of the most modest people in the room, and this is a big room. And he is Lego Papert Professor of Learning Research at the Media Lab, and he develops new technologies and activities to engage kids. So let him come up and tell you more about, Mitch Resnick. Come on up, Mitch.
So it was great spending time out in the Maine area, just interacting with people with lots of flashbacks. And it's just amazing to see people with so many different connections to Seymour, of people spanning time from across many different decades, and spanning geography from all different parts of the world, and spanning disciplines from Seymour's many different areas and fields of expertise and interest. And I think it's so clear, just talking to the people here today, how Seymour's ideas influenced and inspired so many people in so many ways. And I know that all of us, as we gather together, really want to find ways. We believe so deeply and care so deeply about Seymour's ideas, wanting to find ways to make sure those ideas live on, even if Seymour's no longer with us. So as I was planning my presentation, it was worth thinking about what are the ways that we can help support the spread of Seymour's ideas so that they can continue to influence and inspire people around the world, inspiring children and teachers and parents and researchers. And as I started thinking about how to frame those ideas, the first phrase that came to mind was putting Papert into practice. I have a weakness for alliteration. So putting Papert into practice. But as I said it didn't feel right. I realized Seymour wouldn't like that. That it's too simplistic to think that you can take someone's ideas and just put them into practice. That Seymour is always skeptical of that type of top-down linear thinking. I think Seymour he had a much more organic view of teaching and learning, and a more organic view of how ideas spread in the world. It's not like an engineering process of building a structure according to specifications. It's much more like a gardener or a farmer tending to plants, of creating the conditions under which the plants can thrive. So as I thought about that, another phrase came to mind, another alliterative phrase: the seeds that Seymour sowed. The seeds that Seymour sowed. And to me, that felt better. That was more in Seymour's spirit. Because when I think of Seymour, he was always planting new ideas, new seeds. And some of them were mathematical ideas, some were pedagogical ideas, some were technological ideas, some were epistemological ideas. Some of the ideas and some of the seeds spread like wildflower around the world. Some of the seeds took root in some places and not others. Some of the seeds took root in some people and not others. Some of them remained dormant in the ground, waiting for other people to nurture the seeds and find the right conditions in which they can thrive. So in thinking about these seeds that Seymour sowed, I want to share a story about some of those seeds and how they started to take root. It's a story of a 10-year-old boy who was involved in a workshop we were doing here at MIT back in 1985, more than 30 years ago. And it was one of our first Lego logo workshops, where the children were using Seymour's Logo programming language to control creations that they built out of Lego bricks. So I have a video here, about a minute video, that highlights a Lego logo project that this 10-year-old boy, Nicky, was working on. And the video starts with Nicky talking to Seymour about the project.
I was experimenting. At first, I made a big thing about like 6 by 3 inches, and the motor wasn't and Then when I put it on the table and turned it on to see if it would vibrate and move, it busted apart into about like 15 pieces. So then I decided to make it smaller. So I made it smaller, and now it works fine. It's going upside down. Hey, look it. I have an upside.
So when Nicky started work on that project, he started out with the intention of building a car. And he built a motor onto it, and he connected to the computer. And with this new connection with the computer, he typed commands to try and make the car move. And it went forward a little bit, but then the motor sort of became uncoupled. It sort of broke off of the car and started vibrating across the table on its own. And Nicky became really fascinated with this vibration. So he started playing around and experimenting with this vibration. And he started thinking, maybe I could use these vibrations for making something move. So he thought about making this vibrating machine. He put a platform, used some Lego axles as legs, put a motor on top, and he turned it on from the computer and sort of like stayed in place. It wasn't doing much. And he felt he had to amplify the vibrations. And he then drew upon some personal experience. He enjoyed skateboarding, and he remembered that when he went skateboarding, if he whipped his arms around, it would push him forward. So he thought maybe he could use that same idea. So he built an arm coming out of the motor, figuring if it whipped around, it would amplify the vibrations and make it move. And in fact, that worked. And he was very pleased with it. And he then even found that he could start steering his vibrating machine. When the motor turned one way, it went forward and to the right. When the motor went the other way, it went forward and to the left. So we could steer it with controlling the direction of the motor. And he even put a light sensor on and started playing with seeing if it could follow the light based on what the light sensor did to turn the motor this way and that way. So as I think about this story, I think you can see a few examples of some of the seeds that Seymour sowed. For me, an important element of this story is that Nicky was given the time and the encouragement to follow his interest and his curiosity. He wasn't given a specific task to solve or a challenge to solve. I think Seymour recognized that it was important for children not just to be able to answer questions, but to ask their own questions, to come up with their own projects. And that was one of the seeds that Seymour sowed. And when the motor broke off from the car and started vibrating, and some people might have seen it as a failure, Seymour and others at the workshop encouraged Nicky not to see it as a failure, but to see it as an opportunity for exploration. Because I think Seymour understood a lot of the best learning experiences would come when people were actively engaged in experimenting, trying new things, taking advantage of the unexpected when it happened. That was another one of the seeds that Seymour sowed. And when Nicky needed to amplify the vibrations, and he drew upon his personal experience as a skateboarder, it was similar to the way a lot of children, as they learned turtle graphics, would use their own body knowledge, the way Nicholas was showing before with making the circle, and drawing on their knowledge of the body. So that Seymour would call it body syntonic learning. And that was another seed that Seymour sowed. And when Nicky was then programming this vibrating machine to try to follow the light, he was exploring ideas about feedback and sensing and control, ideas that previously were totally inaccessible to elementary school students. And those too were ideas that Seymour sowed. Looking back at this from a 2017 lens, people would describe Nicky as a maker and a coder, engaging in computational thinking. Of course, in 1985, few people were talking about making or coding or computational thinking, and nobody was talking about a maker movement or a coding movement. But Seymour back then in 1985 was already laying the intellectual foundations for those movements, or you might say sowing the seeds for those movements. And in many ways, I think it's fair to see Seymour as like the intellectual godfather and the patron saint of those current day movements. Now, that doesn't mean, that although those movements have embraced, have carried on Seymour's ideas, and Seymour's seeds are bearing fruit, and that I think if you look around, there are more kids in more places with more opportunities to experiment and explore and express themselves with technology and building on Seymour's ideas. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that Seymour would embrace all of the activities that you would see today that are around making and coding and computational thinking.